Hi, I'm Bill Holcomb, and today I will be sharing an essential lesson in watercolor for beginners. Through painting this Monument Valley landscape, I'll teach you the techniques needed to build up texture in your paintings and really add depth to your landscapes. Here's a list of materials used in this tutorial, and you can download my free sketch from a link in the description. I start at the top of the paper with a wash of Windsor yellow. It's quite a weak wash, it's not intense. But then I come into a much stronger wash, joining the two together, of the alizarin crimson together with a little of the Windsor yellow. And come down towards the rocky outcrops, and you can come close to them, and later on we'll use a smaller brush, bring the sky down a little bit further, nearer to those rocks. Still with the mop brush, laying in some of the blue, the Windsor blue in the sky, and just come in here and there with the brush to break it up and to show variation in the sky. Now that smaller brush that I mentioned, say a number 10 or 12, and just add in little parts where the sky comes down to the rocks. Then go to your flat brush. I've got a 3/4 size here. If you have a half size flat brush, that's fine. And a mixture of the Windsor blue and the alizarin crimson, forming some clouds, and I've decided to make them more interesting, as if we've got a wind direction from the right blowing into the clouds and giving them this slant shape. The sun will be intense from the left, so when we get down to painting the rocks, you'll see light on the left side. So you can continue to darken parts of the clouds here and there, giving them interesting shapes. And do remember that all these pigments dry much lighter, so we can use a hairdryer later to speed up the process, and you'll see they're very light. And please remember to like and subscribe. We will also notify you when new tutorials are uploaded, and it's all free. So we're soon at the stage where we're going to dry this off with a hairdryer, and you can mop up the edges beforehand, and here it is, dry and much lighter. Now I'm just doing a little bit of lifting at the top of the rocks, where we've just come over slightly with the sky. So a little bit of clear water in those areas, then using your soft tissue, dab that, press that down with your finger and lift the pigment. But I like to demonstrate that because it's a useful tip for you in your watercolor process. As I mentioned, what we will be doing fairly soon is laying down some of the light colour. Now, first of all, we're going to emphasise distance, so the more distant part of the landscape at the horizon level is always much more blue and hazy. Things blue as they fade into the distance. And here we have a little bit of a colour that's like a magenta, so combination of your Windsor blue and the alizarin crimson, and laying down those distant areas with a smaller brush, something like your number 4 or 5, and just paying attention to the different shapes of the distant areas there where the rocks come down to the main mass of the land. I'm also just laying in a little bit of shadow on the right hand side of some of the rocks. Now, because I'm in that location at the moment, sometimes it's useful to lay in shadows first. Sometimes you lay them in later. It can be varied depending upon the subject matter at hand. That certainly can apply to buildings and city scenes as well. Now I'm laying down a wash. I've got some yellow ochre and some Windsor yellow, because we're going to need those light areas on the rocks where the sun is from the left. You can use your number 10 brush at this stage, and then a smaller brush for the much smaller rocks. This particular brush that I'm using is a Utrecht brush, and it's number 10, and it has a very nice point to it. So that has dried, and then I can start laying in the darker tones, especially on the shadowy areas. And it's just a case of building up. You'll be repeating this process until you get the correct hue that you're aiming for. And of course later we'll be putting a little bit more structure in the rocks, cracks and crevices, and we'll be using the side of the brush scraping technique as well here and there to add interest to the rocks and make them look as realistic as possible. I have of course studied photographs of this area of Monument Valley in Arizona, and the positioning of the different rocks and so forth, and the way the light plays upon them and the shadows that are cast, so that we can get that as accurate as possible. So hopefully once this is completed, it will be recognizable as that specific location. Now when you want even darker areas on the rocks, this is where you could also start adding to your mixture light red and burnt sienna together with your Windsor blue to make an even darker version for the rocks. And here and there I've laid in wet in wet, and sometimes it's gone on to dry. You just get used to which part of the process to complete. And I would recommend, as I've often recommended, that you can practice things like this on a small piece of paper, little squares of it, just so that you can experiment and see how the paints work when you lay down washes, and build up your confidence in that, so that when you come to paint an actual painting that you want to keep and you want to be representational of a subject, then you've had that practice, you've learnt from that, and then you have more confidence when you go into the main painting. It's also useful to help you understand mixing of colours, because you'll mix colours, you'll think about that intensity, and then with that spare piece of paper you can just use your brush to lay down some of that colour on the spare paper and decide whether that mixture works, whether it needs a little more of one colour, less of another, etc. So continue to do that whole process now throughout here. The only variation is going to be in the middle ground area coming up towards the foreground, where we have this grassy olive green type landscape area with rocks strewn here and there and little bits of sand and so forth, you know. Give a desert feel with a little bit of brush and so forth. It's laying some of that in now. Your blue and yellow mixture can help, of course, form an olivey colour that you wish to lay down. And whilst it's wet, the first wash, the lighter wash, you can add in a darker version and show that variation to make it interesting. So it's not just one simple wash of one colour with no variation. You have achieved a variation in the hues. Here and there within the rocks, I've also added for the light areas a tiny touch of Scarlet Lake together with my yellow ochre and Windsor yellow mix, which gives it that just little bit of a reddish hue when the sun is hitting those areas and emphasizing certain colors from the rocks. Scarlet Lake is intense as a color, and it just needs a tiny bit on the tip of your brush to mix in with your other colors to achieve that. So now some of that middle area with rocks and sand and so forth strewn in between the brush areas of green that will be coming along. And for that you can be using your number 10 size brush, pointed. Now I'm just laying in some of that middle and towards the foreground area using the scraping side of the brush technique. So it's all broken up as much as possible and made more interesting. So a nice mixture of your different colours, the rocky sandy colour and the scrub greenish colour, olive green, etc. That's built up quite nicely. For the rocky area in the foreground, I've laid over, first of all, a wash which consists of the Windsor yellow and the yellow ochre, with gaps here and there in between. And then for what will be certain darker areas and more intense areas of colour, I've laid in a wash, say especially on the right hand side here, of some of your brownish colours and reddish colours, and varying that up as much as possible so that there is interest rather than one flat colour. And just fusing that in here and there during the wet in wet process. You can use a combination of your number 10 brush and your mop brush on those washes. Then you'll drop down to your smaller brush to painting the detail of the rocks, following the same principles that we've applied to all the rocks in the middle ground and the distance. And as you can see from those rocks, as I mentioned, we've got the light coming from the left and therefore the left of the rocks. So I'm just demonstrating a little bit of that in the foreground, but as I said, it's the same principle. And here we are, we've jumped ahead and you can see what we've done. in achieving that variation and making the rocks look as realistic as possible with their little crevices, their light and dark areas, and so forth. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and here's a finished painting. I think it looks effective. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.